This is Dennis Raimondi at the Coffee League, and my guest today, Marc Beauregard. Marc is the creator and roaster at Bedfellows Roasting Company in Encinitas, California. And I should say, I connected with Marc a while ago. I have another podcast, and he was listening, and we connected, and he sent me some beans he had roasted, and they were fabulous. So I thought I want to follow up with this guy, and he is now. He was in Oakland, I believe, at the time, Marc, and now you're down in Encinitas, a beautiful town, by the way, in North County, San Diego, and some real good coffee going on down there now. Specialty coffee kind of reaching all over the place. But Marc, thank you so very much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Well, thank you, Dennis. Pleased to speak with you.
Great. So our listeners know a little bit about where you're coming from. You were up in roasting in Northern California. You came down to Southern California, and one of the things we were going to discuss today is coffee roasting and coffee business without brick and mortar, without cafes, without stores. And so, tell us a little bit about your journey of how you went. You've been in what you were doing in Oakland and what you're doing now in Southern California.
Sure, yeah. So my story is an interesting one. I kind of came into the coffee industry as an outsider. I think, typically people come into coffee as a barista and they start there. Maybe they were hired at Starbucks in high school and they rise up the coffee chain. And over the years, they end up as a roast master. But that's not my story, and I should say that some of these people that you are interviewing, these are the biggest guys in coffee. These are my heroes. These are my Wayne Gretzky's and my Michael Jordans, my idols. And so I'm just this little guy. I'm this outsider. One day I was in San Francisco and I stared into the roasting tray of a local cafe and I just fell head over heels in love with coffee. And at that moment, I decided that I needed to roast coffee, tonight. I needed to roast. And so I just applied for a couple of jobs, didn't get them, and decided to start my own company, not knowing almost anything about coffee. And I learned as I went along, and a few years later, here I am.
Wow. And then what brought you from Oakland down to Encinitas?
So I was living in San Francisco and I had gotten actually really sick at the time. And I was just looking for a new lifestyle, a warmer climate. I'm from Southern California originally. I'm a huge surfer and Encinitas is a great spot to surf. Me and my girlfriend took a little, we traveled down there. I hadn't been down there in a while. And I was very pleased to see that specialty coffee is now huge in the Encinitas area and in the San Diego area. And that's not really something that was happening when I was down there last, which was about 10 years ago.
Right.
So
I
that was
spent a lot
the
of
green
time.
light for us.
Yeah, I used to spend a lot of time down there, and really in the last 3 or 4 years, the specialty coffee started really making the scene there. And by the way, where do you? There's Swamis, there's Pipes. What beach? Where do you like to surf down there? It's a great surfing culture.
I really love Cardiff.
Uh-huh.
It's one of the most famous waves on the globe, and it's world class for a reason. Swami's is another world class wave. And then I have a couple little secret spots that I'm not going to tell you because I want to keep them that way.
All right, you'll tell me later. A couple of things. One of the things I wanted to get into you with, Marc, because we've discussed this actually by messaging back and forth, and that is that you are when you look at coffee, you see a spiritual component, as do I, and I should say you're a surfer, and I've always seen surfing as having a strong spiritual component as well. Maybe we can even connect the two. But let's talk about coffee. Coffee involves ritual, and there's a spirituality associated with it that I'd like you to discuss because I know it's something you've given a lot of thought to.
Yeah, absolutely. I had been drinking coffee before I got into roasting for a number of years, and it was a non-important beverage in my life. It was just something that I did each morning, like basically everyone in the world almost.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's this legal stimulating drug that we have implemented into our office culture. It's just there. But I really started a few years ago to get into to have a little bit more intention into my morning cup. I kind of created a little ritual around it, and it's my real belief that that coffee is sacred. It's sacred. And if you put a little bit of ritual, a little bit of intention, a little bit of ceremony into that, you know, that 10 or 20-minute period in the morning that we all rush through, I think it's amazing what you can get out of the rest of your day. You know, you start that morning cup with a little ceremony, and that can lay out a really positive rest of your day. You know, you can move mountains.
Tell us about your morning ritual.
Yeah, so I wake up. I start with a meditation, usually right off the bat, but then I rush downstairs and make my cup. So my setup is I have a Hario V60 pour over cone. I have a Burr mill grinder, and by the way, those two things I think are the most important tools in coffee that can improve your cup. A pour over cone and a Burr mill grinder.
Is your grinder a hand grinder, or is it's actually mechanical machine?
I have both at home. So right now my electric grinder just broke. So right now I'm putting in a little elbow grease using my hand grinder every morning. Mm-hmm. The hand grinder is great because it kind of wakes you up, and right. We bring it camping and stuff. There's no electricity needed.
Right.
So it's great.
Okay, so then then you grind the coffee. Then what?
Yeah, I grind the coffee. Heat the water up to about 205. I pour a little spiral cone of hot water in the center of the coffee grinds, and the whole process takes about 5 minutes. I usually don't put milk in my coffee, although sometimes I do. And then I just take my coffee upstairs. I go to my balcony. And if there's sun, I just sit in the morning sun, and I just take that time to do nothing but drink my coffee and be in nature. And so that's where I think a lot of us are missing out, because we're rushing to get the kids to bed, or we're flipping the eggs over at the same time we're making coffee, or we're just maybe pushing a button on our coffee machine. But I think really, if you can just sit and take that extra 10 minutes. And what I do is I will never miss my coffee session. So if I have to be at work at 7, I will wake up that much earlier to have that half an hour for my ceremony.
That's good. You know, there are countries in the world where there's no such thing as coffee to go. That it's just assumed when you have coffee, you're going to sit and experience it. In some cultures, like in Sweden, it might be social. In other and there are times might be very private, but I think coffee cultures vary from place to place. But in the U.S., we often think of coffee as, hey, give me a coffee to go, and you're on the run. And whereas in many places, and what you're recommending is some ritual, some time is taken to really enjoy that period and experience everything around you. And probably because coffee does wake one up a bit, you experience things more fully at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, coffee gives you quote unquote energy as we define it. And so if you're conscious during that time where that energy is ratcheting up, you know, you can really feel it and use it as a tool. And if you focus that energy on something important, then wow, you know, it really makes a difference. But so, you know, Jack Kerouac says, he says, the first sip is joy, the second is gladness, the third is serenity, the fourth is madness, the fifth is ecstasy. That's a Jack Kerouac quote.
Oh, what a great quote.
Problem, yeah, isn't it great? But the only problem I have is that he's talking about tea, right? So tea is sacred in many countries, and so my whole thing is bringing that element of ritual and ceremony into the coffee experience.
Right. I think that's right. I mean, tea has been around a long time. There's a lot of ritual associated with it, a lot of refinement. And I don't know much about tea, but obviously many different types of tea and all. Now, coffee is moving into that realm, like tea, like wine, where single origin, where is it being grown, at what altitude, what the different qualities of the different beans, and so on and so forth. Now, when you tell us about your roaster, when you source your beans, how you go about doing that.
Sure. Yeah, I source coffee from all around the world, and I wish that the average coffee consumer could see what I see when I look at a bean or when I'm roasting coffee, because the more you learn, I mean, it's so intricate and complex. I have so much respect for coffee and coffee professionals and the coffee world. But so I start by importing, or I have people in each country of the world that send me samples, small little samples, and I have this tiny little home roaster in my garage, and that's actually how I started the
Hmm.
company, is roasting out of this super tiny roaster in my garage. So I roast these samples how I think that they would best be served, and then I lay them all out in front of each other, and I do what's called a cupping, and it's basically just sipping coffee in a certain way to taste the qualities. And at that point, I'm not so much looking for the positive qualities in the coffee, but I'm really looking for defects. And so
Hmm.
I'll roast it a little bit lighter. Then maybe I would present it to my customers, and I'll sip these coffees side by side, and I'll look for defects.
Hmm.
And then from there, I narrow it down to the one coffee that I'm going to purchase from that region, and I'll contact the broker or the trader. And usually I have a relationship with this person from previous purchases, but it's an amazing education, sourcing really anything from another country,
Hmm.
because every country has its own issues. There's, in certain countries, there's tons of slavery in coffee. In certain countries, there's export costs. In other countries, there's government and war and problems on that front. And then in other countries, they're just not producing the quality because of some pretty huge issues we have, like the borer beetle or coffee rust,
Right.
things like that that are messing with the quality. So from there, I'll import the coffee, and then it's all about production roasting. So I'll decide exactly where I want that coffee to be. I will load in a bunch of bins of green coffee to the roastery here in Encinitas,
Hmm.
and then I'll leave a day later with a ton of roasted coffee.
Now, let me question I have. When you source and you sample something and you like it, and then you order larger quantity, do you always get what you expect you're going to get, or is there ever problems with that, where you're not being sent what you're actually wanting to get?
There can be problems. I haven't yet encountered that problem, and it might be because I still do small purchases. I'm a smaller company compared to,
Hmm.
your Starbucks or your Blue Bottle coffee.
Hmm.
But yeah, I've heard some stories. I mean, people find rocks in their coffee. People find sticks in their coffee. I've actually found a popcorn kernel in a coffee bag before.
Well, I guess you do it
Yeah.
long enough. You have those experiences. Also wanted to. You mentioned before. You said I wish that people saw what I saw when I look at the coffee bean, the coffee. What is it that you see? Describe it as best you can, so we can get an understanding of that.
Yeah, it's hard to describe. I mean, it just has to do with the growing conditions, with the processing method after it was harvested. But I'm looking at the coffee and I'm deciding how I'm going to roast it.
Hmm.
And it's not just light, medium, or dark. That's the thing. I manipulate time and temperature as a roaster. That's my job. I
Hmm.
manipulate time versus temperature to find the perfect line, the perfect arc, for that coffee to heat up on. And when you do it right, um, you can get strawberries and blueberries and lavender in your coffee, just like wine. There's a myriad of flavor components that you can get.
And over the years of being involved with coffee, has your palate been refined? Do you, from doing all the cupping that you do and whatnot, is that something you learn, or is that something that develops after tasting lots and lots of coffee? How does that develop?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, and I would even admit that my girlfriend has a better palate than mine.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's something that you learn over time, just after hundreds of coffees being sipped and knowing what you're looking for and what you like and what you don't like. It's kind of something that comes with the territory, and those with the non-discerning palates usually don't last as long in the coffee world, especially where it's going with these different processing methods and things like that.
Mm. And we also discussed. You were telling me about you're not brick and mortar. You're not going to open a cafe. Tell us about your thoughts on being in the coffee industry and not being involved in the actual brick and mortar end of it.
Yeah, when I started my company, I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, which while I was living there, it took over as the number one most expensive city in America. So,
Hmm.
um, for me, the option of a brick and mortar cafe just wasn't on the table. And
Right.
so I really had to be creative about how I was going to get my product to my customer and where I was going to find my customer. Now, thankfully, we have this thing called the internet. And before, I had worked as a touring musician, so I knew how to reach people online. And I knew that if I could just prove this concept, if I could get coffees imported, roasted, and shipped to customers, that maybe I could create some sort of subscription mail order coffee club that was, like a wine club where,
Right.
a lot of times you visit a winery, you go wine tasting, you find the one you love, and you sign up for that
Right.
monthly shipment where you never run out of wine again. And, for the business, that guarantees loyalty to the company where you otherwise maybe wouldn't be loyal. So that's what I did. I have some wholesale accounts in the San Francisco Bay Area and now here in the Encinitas, San Diego area as well. But what I focus on is my subscription box. So once a week, I roast a bunch of coffee, and then I spend the rest of the week packaging and shipping that coffee out to my customers who are nationwide. I mean, I'm shipping coffee to Hawaii, to
Hmm.
Alaska, and all 50 states.
Great.
So
And I want to mention that you are found at bedfellowsroasting.com. We'll have that posted up. That's bedfellowsroasting.com. And have you found that in the time that you've been roasting coffee that the consumers are changing? Are people going more for lighter roasts now than they did in the past? How has that changed?
yeah, it's the what was thought of as the first wave of coffee was when America was just first introduced to the can of U-ban
Right,
coffee.
right.
And in those days there were only two ports that were exporting coffee. One was in Yemen, and it was called Mocha, and one was in Indonesia and on the island of Java. And so when we blended those coffees together, we got Mocha Java, and that's where that comes from. So that's
Hmm.
first wave. Second wave would be defined as this Starbucks and Peeps thing that we had going on in the Bay Area, Seattle, Portland, that kind of thing, where you got a little bit higher quality cup, but still that really dark roasted,
Hmm.
oily bean. You dump cream and sugar in there, and that's what a lot of people grew up on in the '60s. Now you have this self-defined third wave as these specialty importers. People are roasting really light, roasting coffee really light, which is bringing out kind of um, the uniqueness of the bean. So now, and I like to compare it to steak. If you blacken a steak well done, then you're gonna maybe not be able to discern the difference between the cuts of steak.
Right.
But if you grill a steak medium rare, then you can really tell a T-bone from just another cut of steak. So that's what we're doing with coffee in the third wave. And so I'm a part of that, but also a lot of my customers are, my parents' age, and they're not going to have lemon curd in their coffee. They're just not going to want to taste that. That's not coffee to them. When they think of coffee, they think of bitter, carbony flavors. And so I do a lot of dark roast as well, and people just love that stuff. So.
Right. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit more about your own coffee consumption. You mentioned the ritual you have in the morning. How much? When else do you drink coffee today, during the day? And do you ever enjoy going to a cafe?
Oh, absolutely. I think for me, if I were to just drink my own coffee, I would forget what that experience is on the outside. So I like to really, I like to recalibrate, and I like to, drink all the different cafes. And that's one of my favorite things to do. And I don't really have a favorite type of coffee. I think my favorite thing about coffee is that you can switch it up. So I will roast across the spectrum for my customers, and I also drink across that spectrum for myself. I really enjoy all the different preparations. I usually only have about a cup of coffee per day, but especially when I'm tasting coffee, when I'm cupping, caffeine consumption is always high for a roaster. So I gotta keep an eye on that.
Right. You mentioned before that there were some people in the industry you looked up to. Are there roasters, or are there people in the industry that have inspired you or over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my early mentors was this man named Gabe Boscana in the Bay Area. He's recently moved away, but he was just my coffee hero. And it was really interesting. I mean, talk about learning about having a coffee palate. I was living in Los Angeles at one time, and I went into Intelligentsia and had what I defined as my first, coffee awakening, where I drank this cup of coffee and I looked into the sky and thought, my God, what
I had a
is
similar
this?
experience myself, actually. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'll bet you did. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was years ago in Los Angeles at Intelligentsia. Well, then a few years later, I had another cup at a place in San Francisco. I can't recall the name of it. And then several years later, I had met this man named Gabe, and I had a cup of his coffee. And he later revealed to me that he was the previous roaster at Intelligentsia and at this other cafe in the city. And it dawned on me, my 3 favorite cups of coffee in my life that were so memorable, I just never forget the smell and taste, were roasted by the same person.
Wow.
So that just blew my mind. I thought there's something here. So, and not everyone in coffee is friendly. I mean, overall, the industry is amazingly beautiful, and especially recently has come together over the rights of transgender and women, and it's really beautiful what the industry has been coming together with. But not everybody's friendly. But Gabe was just so friendly. He just took me under his wing, and he just he answered any question I had and taught me anything I needed to know, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. And do you have employees? Do you have people that work for you that are younger maybe and are aspiring to stay in the industry that you mentor, that you teach?
I don't have any employees. My company's just me, but that's something I'm really looking forward to. And some people have reached out to me, and it blows my mind, because I remember when I reached out to people, and now that the roles are reversed, it's kind of cool. And I actually feel like I maybe have something that I could offer them, and something that I could teach them. And, but I would say for now, the closest thing I have to a full-time employee is Wanda at my local USPS, who takes really good care of me. I see her almost every day dropping coffee boxes off. And there's, once a week I drop way too many boxes to her, and she has to go through those. And she's just a sweetheart. So that's the closest I have to an employee at this point.
But one last thing I wanted to ask, and that was about what the coffee, touched on it before, but what's the coffee culture like in San Diego now? How would you describe it?
I would say there's two kind of flavors going on, and they're really complementing each other well. So there's this old school thing going on. I would say the best definition of that in the Encinitas area would be this place called the Panikin, which is totally famous. They do totally like old school classic coffee, no surprises, and it's delicious. And they serve classic steamed eggs with spinach, and it's that kind of thing. And they're going to get their bikers off the 101, and they're going to get
Right.
their surfers and that kind of thing. And then there's this new chapter of coffee that's kind of sneaking in. There's this place called Lofty Coffee here in Encinitas, and they're doing stuff straight out of Portland. I mean, cupping labs, scientific water manipulation. They're doing in-house roasting and the whole nine yards. And that to me is really exciting.
Right.
But I think what's exciting to me is that both can exist, and not only that both can thrive. There's enough differences that yeah.
I've been to both places. I was very happy when I was out there that Lofty's came in because it was special. There were a few specialty coffee places, but not in North County, and that was great. And by the way, at Panikins, which is a wonderful place, the Peter Giuliano, who's on the Specialty Coffee Association board now.
Yeah.
And he also was one of the founders and owners of Counterculture. That's where he started. He was telling me, and I said, "Oh, I know that place." Then he went on and became very big and a real innovator in specialty coffee. So yeah, I think it's great. Like you said, there's room for everyone and everything. And however people enjoy coffee, it's like wine. Somebody says, "What's a good wine?" Well, it's the one you enjoy. And what we're having with coffee now is more and more refinement, and people's palates are changing. But wherever you go with it, it's enjoyable. And I told a barista today when I got a cup of coffee, and I said, this is often the happiest part of my day. And he said, "Boy, that makes me feel good." So I think that a lot of people could say that. And I love what you brought up about the spiritual component of coffee, because it's been hard to articulate, but there's a spiritual component to it. I'm a person that's practiced meditation for many years, and in my mornings involve meditation and coffee, and sometimes coffee and then meditation. And I think it's important. And one of the things I've seen in my travels worldwide and going to cafes is coffee brings people together, and there's something very wonderful about that. So, anyway, Mark, any final words for our listeners?
Well, yeah, I mean I think you're right about that. Coffee really is a lot of people's favorite part of their day. And my whole thing at Bedfellows Roasting Company, my mission is that it can actually be even better. So let's bring some ritual, some ceremony, some intention into coffee, because it's sacred. That's what I believe.
Great. Yeah, and again, bedfellowsroasting.com. That's where you'll find Mark and his product. Mark, thank you so very much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thanks a lot, Dennis. I really appreciate it.